Your grandmother started cooking on Saturday night for a meal that would not be served until Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock. And by the time you sat down at her table the next day, 28 people would be in that house, and not one of them would leave hungry. And not one of them would leave without something wrapped in tin foil to take home. She did this every single week of her life for 46 years, and she never once called it work. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Number 17. Meatloaf with tomato glaze and green beans. The smell started before you opened the back door. You could be a block away, coming home from church, holding your mother's hand in the white gloves she had pressed the night before, and you knew. Collards on the back burner since 10 in the morning, salt pork rendered down, ham hock falling apart in the pot licker, cornbread crisping in the cast iron skillet your great-grandmother had bought in 1928 for 60 cents, fried chicken resting on a brown paper bag on the counter because you never put it on a plate. Never. The paper bag pulled the last of the grease off and kept the crust crisp. The chicken had been brining in buttermilk since Saturday morning, and Mama had told you not to lift the lid even one time. You did not lift the lid. You knew better. Sunday dinner in your grandmother's house was not a meal. It was a ceremony. It was 3 in the afternoon, never 6 the way the white families across town ate, because black women who worked in white houses Monday through Saturday were finally home by 12 on Sunday, and the whole week had been pointing toward this one stretch of hours when the family would be together at one table and nothing in the world would be allowed to interrupt it. The phone could ring. Nobody answered. The doorbell could chime. Whoever was there came in and sat down. Sunday dinner at 3 was the closest thing to law in your grandmother's house, and the law had not been written down, because it did not need to be. The table seated 8 officially and held 14 in practice. The leaf had been put in on Saturday and would stay in until Monday morning. The folding chair from the front hall closet had been opened for whoever brought a date. There was always a place for the woman from down the street whose husband had passed. There was always a place for the boy whose mama was working a Sunday shift at the hospital. You learned before you could read that the table was bigger than the people who lived in the house, and the meal was for whoever the Lord sent. Number 17. Meatloaf with tomato glaze and green beans. The hot rolls came out of the oven first. Lucille's. Always Lucille's. Lucille B. Smith of St. Andrew's United Methodist in Fort Worth had invented Lucille's all-purpose hot roll mix in 1942 as a fundraiser for her church, and somewhere along the way, that yellow box had made its way into every black kitchen in America. Your grandmother knew exactly how long to let them rise. She pulled them out, and the smell filled the house, and you knew, sitting on the floor in your church clothes, that you would be allowed to eat one before grace if you asked nicely. You always asked nicely. She always said yes. Then came the spread. The collard greens in the deep enamel pot simmered with smoked ham hock since 10 in the morning, the pot liquor so rich and dark you could see your grandmother had been ladling it into a coffee cup all afternoon for whoever felt the start of a cold coming on. The macaroni and cheese in the cast iron baker, 3 kinds of cheese melted into a custard of evaporated milk and eggs, the top crust gold and brown and slightly burned at the edges the way nobody can replicate anymore, because nobody uses 3 kinds of cheese, and nobody bakes it in cast iron, and nobody understands that the edges are the best part. The candied yams swimming in brown sugar and butter, marshmallows on top, just barely caramelized because your grandmother had stood at the oven door and watched them. The black-eyed peas with rice, Hoppin' John, simmered with bacon, a recipe that had been on this continent since the first West Africans brought the peas across in the holds of ships, a recipe older than the country itself, made by your grandmother on a Sunday in 1972 without anybody ever having to tell her how. The fried chicken came out last, because it had to be hot when it hit the table. Crisp, dark gold, salt and pepper, and a single secret your grandmother would not tell anybody, not even your mother, until she was on her deathbed in 1988 and finally whispered it into your mother's ear, and your mother wrote it down on a piece of paper that is in a Bible in a drawer in your kitchen right now. The chicken was the centerpiece. The chicken was the reason the deacon dropped by. The chicken was the reason the boy from down the street would stand at the back door at 2:45 and not have to say a word, because your grandmother would just nod and pull a clean plate out of the cabinet and say, "Wash your hands, baby," and he would. The desserts had been made on Saturday, so they could rest. The sweet potato pie, not pumpkin, never pumpkin. Pumpkin was for the white women in the magazines. Sweet potato was for your people, the custard rich and orange and spiced with cinnamon and a tiny pinch of nutmeg, the crust pressed by hand the night before, the whole pie sitting under a dish towel on the kitchen table, because the smell of sweet potato pie on a Saturday night is a smell that will live inside you for the rest of your life. The banana pudding in the deep glass dish, Nilla wafers, sliced ripe bananas, homemade custard your grandmother had stood over a double boiler stirring for 40 minutes, more wafers, more bananas, more custard, and on top the meringue she had whipped from 4 egg whites and a 1/4 cup of sugar and had browned in the oven that morning, golden and stiff. The peach cobbler in the 9x13 pan, the juice bubbling up through the cracks, served warm with vanilla ice cream that was already melting by the time it hit your plate. The 7-Up pound cake in the bundt pan, glazed with confectioner's sugar and lemon. The cake your grandmother had been making since 1956 for dinner on the grounds at the country church in Mississippi, where her own mother had been a mother board member, dressed in white, sitting on the second pew every first Sunday. You sat at that table at 3 o'clock in 1974, and you held your grandfather's hand on one side and your big cousin's hand on the other, and your grandfather said the same grace he had been saying since 1939, and at the amen the room did not move for one whole breath. One single breath of silence in a room of 14 people, because in that breath, in that house, on that afternoon, the family was whole. The world outside was a world. Inside this dining room was a kingdom. The red Kool-Aid was in the glass pitcher with ice and a cut lemon and a sprig of mint your grandfather had picked from the garden 10 minutes ago. The red drink, the official drink of the Black Church. You did not know it then, but the red came from hibiscus, from a flower that grew in West Africa, that your great-great-great-grandmother had grown in a place she remembered, and the red had crossed an ocean and been remade in a glass pitcher on a kitchen table in 1974 with sugar and water and a packet of Kool-Aid from the corner store. The red was older than your family knew. The red was older than this country. You drank it and you did not know what you were drinking. You were drinking 500 years of memory in a kitchen glass. Number 17. Meatloaf with tomato glaze and green beans. There was the ambrosia salad in the cut glass bowl, marshmallows and coconut and mandarin oranges. There were the pimento cheese deviled eggs sprinkled with paprika. There was the 3-bean salad in the Tupperware that had been your grandmother's wedding gift in 1951. There was the potato salad, not just any potato salad, your grandmother's. The one so famous in the neighborhood that when somebody else brought potato salad to the church homecoming, your grandmother would press her lips together and find a polite way to put 1 spoonful on her plate and leave it there. She would say, later, in the kitchen, to your aunt, "I don't eat everybody's potato salad." And every black woman in that kitchen would nod, because every black woman in that kitchen knew exactly what that sentence meant. It meant, I do not know how clean her house is. It meant, I do not know if she has the seasoning. It meant my mother taught me to be careful whose food I put in my body, and I have not forgotten. The plates went out in tinfoil at the end of the meal, always, without exception. Your grandmother had stacked a roll of Reynolds wrap on the counter, and as people stood up to leave, she walked them to the kitchen and started building. A piece of chicken, A scoop of greens, some mac and cheese, a square of cornbread, a slice of sweet potato pie wrapped separately in waxed paper because the pie would soak through. She handed it to whoever was leaving. She said, "This is for your sister," or "This is for your husband," or "This is for the man who lives in the house behind you." And it was understood, without anybody having to say it, that the meal had not ended when the last person stood up from the table. The meal continued, in foil, on porches across the neighborhood, in the hands of people who could not come, who were sick, who were working, who were grieving, who were alone. The black church fed everybody. The Sunday dinner was just the first room. Then the 80s came. Your grandmother did not stop cooking, but her daughter did. Your mother got a job at the bank downtown, and her shifts changed, and Sundays became the only day she could clean her own house, and the standing invitation to come to 3 o'clock started to slip. Once a month, once every 6 weeks, twice a year on holidays. The microwave came into the house in 1983, and a Stauffer's lasagna in a foil pan started to look like dinner. The cast iron skillet got moved to the bottom cabinet behind the colander. The grocery in the black neighborhood closed in 1987 and was replaced by a convenience store that sold lottery tickets and not Collards. KFC opened on the corner. Popeyes opened across from it. Sunday dinner did not die. Sunday dinner was outsourced, one bucket at a time, by a generation that loved their mothers but had run out of hours. Number 17, meatloaf with tomato glaze and green beans. And then the church changed too. The motherboard got smaller. The women in white on the second pew at First Sunday, the wisest of the wise, started passing. There were 6 in 1976. There were 3 in 1989. There was 1 in 2003. Dinner on the grounds stopped happening after the homecoming in 1991 because the woman who had run it for 36 years could not stand for that long anymore, and nobody asked to take her place. But here is what nobody can take. Here is what survives. You remember the smell of the collards. You remember the orange of the sweet potato pie. You remember the sound of your grandmother's hand patting the back of the cast iron skillet to test the heat, and the way she said good when the heat was right. You remember the foil on the plate she handed you when you walked out the back door. You remember sitting at 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon in 1974 with your grandfather's hand in yours and a piece of fried chicken on your plate and the sound of 14 people laughing at something your aunt had just said. You remember it the way you remember your own heartbeat. You did not know then that you were inside a thing that was passing. You did not know that the recipe for sweet potato pie would die with your grandmother in 1988, except for the small piece of paper she had whispered to your mother and your mother had written down, and is now in a Bible in a drawer in your kitchen. You can open that drawer, you can pull out that Bible, you can find that paper, you can hold it in your 2 hands, and you can stand in your own kitchen on a Saturday morning, and you can take down a cast iron skillet from a shelf you have been meaning to clean for 2 years, and you can press a crust by hand on a Saturday night, and you can call your daughter, and you can call your granddaughter, and you can tell them to come over at 3 o'clock the next afternoon, and you can set the table for 14, even if only 6 come. You can put the leaf in. You can wrap a plate in tin foil for the boy across the street whose mama is working a Sunday shift. You can pour red Kool-Aid into a glass pitcher, and you can drink with your granddaughter 500 years of memory. The kingdom did not end. The queen passed it down. You are the queen now. The dishes are in your hands. What time was Sunday dinner in your house? Sweet potato pie or pumpkin pie? Who was on the motherboard at your church? Tell me what your grandmother cooked on the first Sunday. Tell me her name. I read every single comment.